Let us bring in our very distinguished guest, New York Congresswoman and House GOP Conference Chair, Elise Stefanik. Elise, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming back. Happy Independence Day to you, ma'am. And I want to get your take. I think this poll, which will be released formally in the days ahead, is very significant. When people consider the threat of job losses, all of a sudden they don't like higher taxes. And so I'm recommending to you that this is an argument that you all should be using much more and citing the distinguished economic models that are predicting job losses. What you think?
I agree with you, Larry. Republicans are going to focus on economic growth and focus on how we are the party of tax cuts and not tax hikes. As you pointed out, President Biden has proposed trillions and trillions of dollars of new taxes, whether it's increasing the rate of the death tax through the step up, or whether it's getting rid of our tax sovereignty and farming it out to Europeans, which puts American workers and American companies at a disadvantage. It's particularly troubling, Larry, because we're coming out of a pandemic and we still have over 9 million Americans who are unemployed. We need to focus on job creation, not policies such as higher taxes, which will lead to job losses. And I think the polling is quite interesting. This resonates not just with Republicans, but with Democrats and independents as well. I know in my district, at this time, particularly as Americans are facing inflation, the highest rate since 2008, the last thing they want is higher taxes.
Yeah, you see, it's funny. Now, as you would guess, President Biden advocating for his higher taxes, you know, he advocates for so-called racial equity, redistributionism. You know, that crowd doesn't talk about growth. But I think that you might consider, this is just a suggestion, you know, Kudlow, it's a free advice, you take it or not. But some of these economic models, this is, you know, very reputable outfits. In other words, Biden says, well, we think this. I think you got to put the tax foundation up there. You got to put the Wharton Penn model is very interesting. University of Pennsylvania, Wharton Business School, very good B school, of course. And the National Association of Manufacturers, their model comes from Rice Institute in Texas, or Rice University now, which is a hell of an impressive place. I would quote them. You know, they're all showing, by the way, about a 1 to 1.5% loss in the economy and jobs over the next, 10 years. I would say that. I mean, I know we have to emphasize spending, and there's too much spending going on, but at least don't forget the tax side, and when you get the taxes, it's about jobs.
Absolutely. You're right, Larry. And we are going to be quoting those studies, particularly the Tax Foundation. I've been meeting with members of the Republican members of Ways and Means, and this is a focus. This is a message area that Republicans, again, it not only appears to our party, but to independents and Democrats as well. When you talk about the impact of tax hikes on job losses, again, coming out of a pandemic or any time in American history, Americans do not want to see job losses. They want to see economic growth.
Now, Elise Stefanik, what's the latest deal on the reconciliation, infrastructure stuff? I'm reading an article, I believe it was in the Washington Times today, maybe the Examiner, I don't know. But the so-called family cabinet, Biden has a family cabinet that includes the Treasury Secretary on down, I suppose. But they're out there hustling for reconciliation as well as infrastructure. In other words, they have not given up on the Green New Deal or the family infrastructure, which is, of course, where the tax hikes come into play. So I don't think they've changed their stripes, even though the president seemed to walk it back. What do you think? What are you hearing?
My assessment is that President Biden killed any chance for a bipartisan infrastructure bill, despite the fact that he announced his support the day after. He then announced a veto unless it had the Democrats' larger behemoth package attached to it to reconciliation. They walked that back, but then they put out White House senior advisors, and they wouldn't answer yes or no whether President Biden would sign a truly bipartisan infrastructure deal. What we saw last week when we were in session is Democrats put on the floor a highly partisan infrastructure bill, not paid for. $1 out of every $2 went to Green New Deal programs. And that's just not where the American people are. Republicans have put forth our infrastructure plan that's using the unused COVID funds. So again, that's the pay for, whereas Democrats don't want to talk about a pay for for their bill. And ultimately, we know it's the American taxpayers that are going to pay for this. So I agree with you, Larry. My assessment is there's going to be so much pressure from the left that we will not see a bipartisan infrastructure package. And the person who will be held accountable for that is President Joe Biden.
Elise, when is this going to play out legislatively? You need a budget resolution. Right? I mean, I've been through this a couple times in my occasional careers in the government. You need a budget resolution. I don't see a budget resolution. I do see an infrastructure package, but I see a very vague one without many specifics on spending or pay-fors. So in your judgment, you're part of the leadership now. Congrats as always. But when is this going to play out? What's the timeline?
Well, it's a great question, Larry. Of course, we will go back into session for a few more weeks in July before our August work period, and Democrats have a long, long to-do list. The challenge they're going to face is they have far left members of their party and then members who are less further to the left, but are pretty progressive. It is going to be a challenge for them to pass their budget, and what the budget, I think, from the Democrats' perspective, is going to be, spending no end in sight, a budget that will not come to balance. But I think you're going to see this pressure mount in July. If they can get it done is really an open question. What's important for your viewers to know is Republicans are the only party that put forth a budget that actually balances in our lifetime. And that's something that we need to stand strong for. But we've also, as I said, put forth an infrastructure bill that actually invests in infrastructure, roads, waterways, bridges, not the Green New Deal progressive priorities that the left has put forward.
You know, if you did it right and you had a slimmed down infrastructure bill, really, I mean, I know this pretty well because we tried to fight this battle when I was in the White House. Frankly, Elise, you could bond out everything. You sell local bonds, state and local bonds with 30 or 50-year maturities. That matches the infrastructure efficiency, if you will. You're essentially swapping out an asset for a liability. You don't need any darn taxes at all. And everybody knows that. Everybody knows that if it were a decent bill. I mean, that's just the long and the short. Let me ask you one last thing before I lose you. This is an unfair question, but what the heck. Will the SALT tax deduction be restored in any bill?
Well, the challenge with what Democrats have put forth in the SALT deduction is they want a tax hike at the highest rate. And they also have infighting within their own party. So I don't think they get that done. I think, again, it's just a heavy, heavy lift. And they have issues within their own party. The far left is really controlling where the Biden administration, Nancy Pelosi, how they're running the policymaking process, which is why you've seen Joe Biden basically kill the infrastructure deal. On the SALT issue as well, the administration hasn't taken an explicit position on that. But again, the Democrats' bills that they have put forward to deal with SALT raise that top rate. So that is a tax hike. You know, I come from New York. We have high taxes. We need to cut taxes at the state level to make sure that we address this double taxation issue that New Yorkers are facing.
There you go. Well said. Elise Stefanik, as always, great to see you. Thanks very much for your insights.